Hello, welcome to the Franchise Tax Board's YouTube channel. This presentation is on real estate withholding for foreign sellers. Let's look at the topics we will cover. In this video, we will review real estate withholding requirements, and we will define withholding agents and remitters. We will also cover the following: withholding exemptions, remitter responsibilities, how to submit Form 593 for a foreign seller, how to complete Form 593 with foreign sellers/transfer information, filing instructions, liability and penalties, and lastly, resources. Let's get started. Generally, withholding is required on the sale or transfer of California real property unless an exemption applies in Part 3 or 4 on Form 593 Real Estate Withholding Statement. Real estate withholding is a prepayment of tax on the sale of California real property. The funds withheld during escrow will be available to be claimed on the seller's tax return and offset their tax liability and can potentially result in a refund. Let's move on to defining some common terms we will use throughout this presentation. Remitter. A remitter is any person who is required to remit to FTB any tax withheld on any disposition from the sale or exchange of California real estate and who files the prescribed forms on the buyer's behalf. Remitters are also known as payers or withholding agents. And in this case, escrow is typically the remitter during an escrow transaction. Let's move on to withholding exemptions. There are 3 scenarios in which withholding is not required, which means no forms are required. These automatic exemptions are if the total sales price is $100,000 or less, the seller is a bank acting as a fiduciary for a trust, or if the property is being foreclosed. A seller may also meet a full or partial exemption when certifying to an exemption in Part 3 or 4 on Form 593. Please note that for a foreign seller to qualify for any exemption, they must have a valid taxpayer identification number at the close of escrow. If they do not have one, then they may contact the Internal Revenue Service and apply for an individual taxpayer identification number. Now we will review remitter responsibilities. Remitters are responsible for withholding notification, FTB Form 593 verification. They must also withhold and remit withholding, and lastly, retain withholding forms. Now let's look at these 4 key items more closely. The remitter's first responsibility is withholding notification. The remitter must provide the buyer with written notification of the withholding requirements and provide the seller with a copy of Form 593 to complete. The second responsibility is to validate any withholding exemptions. Remitters must verify exemption certifications on Part 3 or 4 of Form 593 to the extent of their knowledge. For example, if a seller completes Part 3 and certifies that the property was their principal residence, but the escrow company knows that the house was their vacation home, then withholding should be done. If the remitter has no knowledge of the facts, then they can accept the certification. The remitter must verify the 593 is completed, signed, and received prior to the close of escrow. The third responsibility is to withhold and remit withholding. This means the remitter must submit Form 593, payment voucher Form 593V, along with the payment. There are 2 methods of calculating withholding. The total sales price method is 3 1/3% of the total sales price. The alternative method is the reported gain multiplied by the seller's maximum tax rate. To use the alternative method, Part 6 computation of Form 593 must be completed. If the seller does not complete Part 6, then the total sales price method must be used. The remitter must mail the withholding payment, Form 593 and 593V payment voucher for real estate withholding to FTB by the 20th day of the month following the close of escrow. The fourth responsibility is to retain withholding forms. Remitters must keep a copy of Form 593 for 5 years following the closing date of the transaction and provide it to FTB upon request.
Now we'll explain how to handle a foreign seller that doesn't have an individual taxpayer identification number at the close of escrow. If the seller is unable to acquire an ITIN prior to escrow closing, the seller becomes ineligible for any exemptions and the remitter must withhold. Remitters are required to submit Form 593 even when the seller is unable to provide an ITIN. Remitters must verify that Form 593 is completed and signed. Here's an example of what Form 593 Parts 1 and 2 may look like for a foreign seller with no taxpayer ID and a foreign address. Let's look at Part 2 more closely. We often get full addresses squeezed in on the address line, which causes processing delays on our end. Please ensure the city is included in the box titled City and the post office code is included in the zip code filed. Here is an example on how to properly fill out Part 2 with a foreign seller's American address. Ensure that Part 2 is complete and correct. It is important that the address is correct to ensure the seller receives future correspondence. If a seller inquires how to apply for an ITIN, advise them to visit the Internal Revenue Service website and follow their instructions. Now let's review California income tax return filing instructions for a foreign seller. First, the seller must have an ITIN prior to filing their return. The seller must also contact the Withholding Services and Compliance section at Franchise Tax Board and provide the ITIN so it can be applied to their withholding credit. After the real estate withholding credit is applied to the ITIN, a California income tax return can be filed. Let's move on to liability and penalties. If the remitter fails to withhold, they can be liable and assess a fee or percentage of the amount required to be withheld. We may also assess an information return penalty for failure to file complete, correct, and timely information returns. The penalty is calculated per seller. An intentional disregard penalty will be imposed if the remitter intentionally did not withhold at the close of escrow. Please see Publication 1016, Real Estate Withholding Guide, or FTB 1150, Withhold at Source Penalty Information for the current liability and penalty amounts. Here's a list of resources that are available on our website to request or download. Form 593, Real Estate Withholding Statement, Form 593V, Payment Voucher for Real Estate Withholding, FTB 1016, Real Estate Withholding Guide, FTB 1150, Withhold at Source Penalty Information, FTB 4050, Foreign Sellers Brochure, FTB 4064, Quick Reference Guide, California Real Estate Withholding. This is our contact information. You can call us at 916-845-4900 or 888-792-4900. Please visit our website www.ftb.ca.gov to obtain real estate withholding information and download our forms and publications. And please be sure to check out our other YouTube videos on real estate withholding. To stay current on updates related to real estate withholding, be sure to subscribe to our subscription services at ftb.ca.gov. If you would like to attend a real estate withholding presentation, you can email us at ftbrealestateeducation@ftb.ca.gov. We hope you find this information useful. Thank you for watching.